Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. On this episode, we're going to go back and we're going to talk about independent wrestling. Stuart Kemp asked us to go back and let's talk about a little bit of independent wrestling. But I think before we talk about what's going on today in independent wrestling, we've got to go back to the territory days. If you were an independent wrestling group, you were what?
Outlaw group.
You were an outlaw group. You know, when I think about outlaw groups, and I think about the first ones that I can remember, I remember Ted Allen. I remember Ted Allen running shows. And it was so funny because Ted Allen would run when the outlaw group from Georgia Championship Wrestling. He would run in Cartersville and Rome and a bunch of places like that. But he was but he was in a way that our father, Ron West, which was mighty big in the Georgia Championship Wrestling offices. He would actually go to and want to run in Cartersville, Georgia, and he called Ted Allen and said, "Ted, we want to run on so-and-so date." And not only was he an outlaw promoter, but he would also run the local town for Georgia Championship Wrestling.
That's right. Had a great crowd in Cartersville at the stadium, at the high school stadium there. Main event was Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff against Wahoo McDaniel, Tommy Rich. That place was packed. In Cartersville. It was awesome. That was the only match on the card, basically. They had 4 matches, but everybody come to see Wahoo and Tommy Rich against, and that was just right after the Cadillac incident with Wahoo McDaniel.
But you know, I will tell you this: Ted Allen drew some great crowds.
Yeah.
As an outlaw promotion. Now we got to talk about what happens sometimes, and especially in Florida with Eddie Graham. If you were an outlaw promotion, you better make sure you didn't put no names on there that was close to one of their wrestlers' names. Because they would show up at your town and beat every one of your wrestlers up. and because most, I won't say all, I can't say all, because there are some very accomplished wrestlers wrestling there. But when you took an Eddie Graham and Mike Graham and those kind of guys, and they came into the place, the Briscoes, pretty well wasn't going to beat them. Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk. I don't think Terry Funk did it too often, but I think Dory Funk Jr. would. Because they wanted to keep you away from their territory. And that didn't really help. They still had outlaw groups all over the place. But they'd even go in there and sit in the crowd sometimes, and I guess they did scare them. They didn't never know when they was going to jump in the ring. Jack, when let's say the 1980s, did you go to any outlaw wrestling in the territory days in Georgia? Or
that's where I started. You know, was outlaw shows, and to show you how prevalent outlaw wrestling was, I started off wrestling Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every week, and did that for years of just outlaw shows. So that, you know, they were everywhere. Now, I didn't know the difference in them till I got to Continental, and then I got a great awakening. I won't say a rude awakening because it was great to finally be around people who actually did business the actual right way. Because outlaw wrestling, a lot of people that ran those shows didn't have the best reputation. But I remember working for Ted. Ted was the first one to ever book me out of the state of Alabama to go somewhere. And Dillard's Music Park there in Rome, Georgia. And I went every Saturday night for several months. And man, I mean, it drew great crowds. That building was so hot that people would come in, buy their tickets, sit down. They'd raise the side doors up and have a little breeze going. But I wrestled Big Bill Dromo there. I mean, a lot of the Big O, a lot of the big time guys, came through there.
You know, and I think that people would think, well, they didn't draw, but they did.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can remember going to some shows and seeing them. And I remember a guy locally around here, Ken Woodby, would run Cleveland, Tennessee, and go up there at that Truett junior high school back in the 80s, and this would have been about 86, drawing better than we were in some cases in Continental Championship Wrestling at the time, and just tremendous crowds. That didn't always hold up, but they did very well. So independent wrestling, which was outlaw wrestling at the time. When did they start? By the way, Jay, when did it go from outlaw wrestling to independent wrestling?
I honestly don't remember it being referred to as independent wrestling until maybe sometime in the 90s. It just seemed like a lot of people were getting kind of their feelings hurt when you'd call them an outlaw wrestler. I always wore that as a badge of honor, because I started there, I learned there, and I grew from there.
Now, did you know that's what that people called that outlaw wrestling? That the actual territories called it the Outlaws?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what we knew what we were.
And now I want to be honest with you. I went to a lot of great shows. I know that Ken Woodby had great shows. I actually went to a lot of his shows and watched them during the time. I had some great shows. Wrestling 2 was wrestling for him, and he had been doing the Wrestling 2. Ken Woodby did Wrestling 2. He was Wrestling 2 at the shows. Wrestling 2 showed up one night and said he wasn't the real Wrestling 2, and they had a feud together. It was great stuff. They would draw about 2,000 or 3,000 people. That Truett Junior High School was a huge school, and it was packed. I mean, the floor was packed, the thing was packed, and it was an incredible thing. So,
it was not unusual. In fact, it was unusual to have less than 500 at a show. But we would have 1,000, 1,500 people. We'd do high schools that would be packing those out. Now, Continental Southeastern, whatever, would be running and drawing several thousand people, but we'd sometimes do about half of what they were drawing and had no names on the card.
I know the first time I ran into Jack, I believe, and it could have been before he got there, but this was maybe not. Well, we might have already known Jack because, but Mickey Henry. And we got to talk about him a little bit. One of the guys that's been probably one of the longest running promoters in Alabama.
Yeah, 40 years now.
And you got to give him the credit. You got to give him credit where credit is due. But he had put on the poster, he had called it Intercontinental Championship Wrestling. It was on the poster, Intercontinental Championship Wrestling, and it had the Dirty White Boy. It had the Nightmare. It had a couple of names like that. And Ron Fuller got very upset about this. And so he sent Dad there. And I remember getting there maybe, I don't know, a little bit before the show, but there was a crowd packed out to come see the show. And I remember Dad, I guess he went and talked to Mickey and told him, Ron didn't like that. He didn't appreciate it. And I don't know if it stopped Mickey. I don't know if we ever know if it stopped him or not.
Yeah.
But he did go and talk to him. But I think Jack was there. I believe you were there doing the super machine or something at that point.
I think so.
Some kind of machine deal at the time. And but great crowd. Great crowd. They were already lined up ready to get to the show. So Outlaw Wrestling, that was called Outlaw Wrestling. I can see why they quit calling it Outlaw Wrestling. That was pretty mean. Let's talk about a little bit about independent wrestling later on. After that, I would think after Ted Allen, I think that the next person that I just remember was Ben Masters, Cordell, Georgia. He had some great shows, drew some great crowds. And this would have been, what did we talked to him? He said about 87, 88 when he started doing those shows. Just tremendous crowds in Cordell at that National Guard Army. It's incredible what he did. Is there anybody else, Jack, at that time frame that you can think of that was running wrestling that did? Jimmy Powell ran some shows.
Yeah, Jimmy Powell ran.
At one time, Ken Hawk also ran some shows.
Ken Hawk was on the very first show that I was ever on.
Ronnie Gossip sold many shows, many companies. Bruce Prentice, Burt Prentice is probably one of the great promoters out there.
Rick Arledge ran a lot of stuff, shows. Rick was a great guy, but totally outlaw.
So many great things. A lot of independent wrestling today. We don't have time. I wanted to talk a little bit about it today, but we're running out of time. We'll get back to some because there's a lot of independent shows that I'd like to really take and talk about. And not that I agree with all of them. I watched a few. that have television shows, and there were some things they could work on. Some things they could work on. I just still say wrestlers need to slow down today. They just need to slow down because they make themselves look bad. And I think one of the problems with the independent shows today is, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm not for sure the guys. I think everybody has different names for holds and different names for things. And then when somebody calls for something like that, they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know, somebody has a Hurricane Rana, somebody might tell it the JoJo below yo, and then the guy over here calls something else and you don't know what they are. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I do.
And so I think that is the problem today. You know, years ago,
Not standardized.
You could go from North Carolina to Georgia and you wouldn't miss a beat because everybody used the same wording. Everybody used the same stuff, whatever it might be. And they may have something new they were working on during the week, but the majority of the time it was a standard deal.
And I think Flying Fernum was the same in every territory.
Flying Fernum. You got to hit somebody with the Flying Fernum everywhere you went. The Boom Boom was always a great spot to do.
Good. That's right.
The old Boom Boom spot, that was always a great one. The rat-a-tat-tat, that was always a good thing to do. But today, I think it's too many trainers train people so different that when they get in the ring together, if they've not wrestled each other, that's the reason that as a promoter, as a booker, slow them down and say, listen, let's make sure you understand people's terminology. So when you get in that ring, you understand what you're supposed to do, because there's nothing worse to say, hey, I wanted you to give me a backdrop. And I didn't know what a backdrop was. I remember it being called the Sammy Davis Jr. I didn't know there was a backdrop. It's crazy stuff.
High elevation. Bill Watts called it high elevation.
Yeah.
I never did understand that, but okay.
All right, folks, if you enjoyed this video, give us the big thumbs up. About left the screen. Give us the big thumbs up. Subscribe to the page you haven't already, and go one step further. Hit that notification bell and share the video. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video right here on Pro Wrestling Inside and Out.